Very good evening and a warm welcome to our chief guest. It is my pleasure to welcome each and every one of you to the Business World International Award Ceremony organized by the Business World International Organization.
Very special occasion, ladies and gentlemen, to deliver the keynote address. I have the pleasure of inviting the founder of Accept Research, and he's also advisory board member of Business World International Organization, United States of America. He's also been pioneering the sports tourism, initiating cross and intercultural sports exchange programs with Germany. In fact, he is also a senior lecturer from the Hilden Business College, Germany. He's also the head of Accept Research, as I said, and the chairman of Aquarius Resorts Private Limited. And he's obtained his degree from the University of Hohenlohe, Germany, and the University of Bochum, Germany. He's also been a lecturer in political science, social science, business college students' final year lecturer as well. It's my pleasure in inviting Professor Dr. Dietmar Doering to deliver the keynote address. Everybody, put your hands together for a round of applause.
Yeah, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And I want to start to say my words of compliments to the organization, the BWIO here in this wonderful hotel. And welcome also to the distinguished special guests here and chief guests and all of you. It's nice to see such a big audience here. And I hope that I can deliver you an interesting topic. And I will try to explain this in a normal language, so not that scientific oriented. It will be a little bit easy to understand for you. So the topic what we have is actually reflected in the news in Sri Lanka over many years. And as you can see behind here on the screen, we are talking, or I will talk about the IMF. The short form IMF, behind that is the International Monetary Fund. Sri Lanka has been subjected to negotiations over many years with the IMF. The IMF to come into the scene to help Sri Lanka funding outstandings, loans which had been accumulated in not only in recent years, I can say in recent decades. So I will come to that. The background from the IMF is interesting to highlight that a little bit. You can see here there's a clay pot with a lot of money inside. The IMF is funded by various nations, rich nations who are funding the IMF fund. And the biggest one is related also to our business world organization, to America, to USA. USA is the biggest funder of the IMF, as you can see here. And among them are also others like Italy, Japan, China, France, and Germany. And especially the third world countries or developing countries, they sometimes have to refer to the IMF to come out of financial troubles. So it is in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka, as at today, has outstandings in the range of approximately 50 to 51 billion US dollars. So that in form of various type of obligations. But when you say 50 to 51 billion US dollars, then we are talking about 50,000 to 51,000 millions. Yeah? So imagine that amount is a huge amount of money, and we are coming back to that. At this moment, your government is negotiating terms with the IMF, and you will not find many details of these terms publicized in the newspapers, and there's a reason for that. I'll come to that. I'll talk a little bit about the funding line. Funding line means from where all this money comes, who is generating this money, and that is something probably for most of you a little new subject, what I'm raising. The biggest donor, the biggest collector, as mentioned earlier, is the United States of America in the middle, who is funding the IMF. And on the left side, you can see the Federal Reserve Bank of America. So the Federal Reserve Bank of America is not an ordinary bank, though it is mentioned. Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve Bank of America is creating money. How is it creating money? What is the meaning of that? You just jump into this scenario now. The Federal Reserve Bank in America creates money. I leave it as that. And now we are going to the details. There's a very prominent US politician. He's not the only one, there are more who are voicing the same subject. There is Mr. Wright Patman, and he said once, the dollar represents a $1 debt to the Federal Reserve System. The Federal Reserve banks create money out of thin air to buy government bonds from the US Treasury, and has created out of nothing a debt which the American people are obliged to pay with interest. So what does it mean? Again, coming back. What this gentleman said, and he was a member of the Congress in the United States, is retired and no more, but this John William Wright Patman, he was a lawyer by profession, and he was known as a fiscal watchdog. So he had made his publications about money. And he challenged the practices of the banks, the major banks and the Federal Reserve. Now coming back to that what he said here, the same words were used once by John F. Kennedy. John F. Kennedy, a famous president who was assassinated in the 1960s. He too mentioned the same thing, and he wanted to change that. So coming back, the Federal Reserve Bank of America is creating money out of thin air. What is the meaning of that? And you see there's a gentleman on the right side. He is the present chairperson of the Federal Reserve Bank. He was interviewed by an American TV network. And he was questioned and asked, Mr. Chairman, now tell us, how do you generate money? How are you doing it? From where you get the money? Then Jerome Powell, the gentleman on the right side, he said, we are creating it digitally, electronically. What is the meaning of that? To translate for all of you, they have a laptop in the US Federal Reserve Bank. And if there is a request from a bank, we'll say from a big bank, say the Bank of America, the Bank of America requests money. They contact the US Federal Reserve Bank, said we need money. That means you need a loan. That means you become a creditor, the creditor on that side, and on the other side is the lender. The Federal Reserve Bank, they use the laptop, and they send money out of thin air, it's nowhere existing, they send it to the Bank of America. So basically, the US Fed is creating debts, in the deeper sense. They create an amount of money in their laptop, and they put send button and send it to the Bank of America. So that is a system, what Henry Ford, the famous industrialist who created cars in America, he said one day, if the normal people get to know how money is created, if they get to know today, tomorrow we will have a revolution in the streets. So I would say basically in this audience here to whom I'm talking now, there may be also some professors. Actually, I'm also affiliated to the University of Colombo Department of Economics, and I spoke to one of my professors. They simply don't know. I guess that 90% of you who are seated here, you didn't know that. Am I wrong? I guess not. So, but that is the way how money is created in America. I do not refer anything to Sri Lanka. So, the question is now, if money is created out of thin air, and made to be a debt, like Sri Lanka, 51 billion US dollars debt. Why can't we turn this and say, okay, there's debts created out of thin air, let us send the debt back into thin air. Why not? Is that legitimate or not? And we have 200 scholars coming back to Sri Lanka, professors, Nobel Prize Award winners, brains, who said, they said in common 200 signatures in favor of Sri Lanka. They said, cancel all the debts what Sri Lanka has to the foreign creditors, to the private creditors, cancel it. And there is a legitimacy in that. If money is created out of thin air, why debts cannot be abolished? These highly intellectual people, they have asked, make Sri Lanka's debts null and void. To a little bit, again, coming back to the bailout situation for Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is not the only country who is asking and seeking a bailout from the IMF. In 2008, Greece was in the same situation. The IMF, exactly a troika, three different entities. That was the European Central Bank, the IMF, and I think the World Bank. Three of them, they went to Greece. Greece was totally bankrupt, and they have bailed out Greece. But at what cost? And that is the important question here. At what cost? Practically, it went like that. On Monday morning, the IMF has sent, I think at that time, more than 100 billion euros to the Greek Central Bank. Monday morning, they sent the money there. Monday afternoon, the entire 100 billion went to Frankfurt and international banks. So the Greek had that only for a couple of hours. None of the Greek citizens have benefited from this transaction. Then for what are we doing that? Why are nations asking for bailouts? There is a credit system. No? Now, Sri Lanka at the moment is rated by the credit agencies on D. There is like A+, you have A+, 3+, B, C, and now D. D is junk status. That means virtually Sri Lanka is bankrupt. You cannot get any credits. If you get credits from someone, they will ask sky-high interest. So the entire procedure to get a bailout, that means nothing else, and you're not losing the facilities, but you will have an extension, so-called an extension, or a restructuring of debt. But you're not free. You have to pay it one day. Your children have to pay that, or your grandchildren. 51 billion US dollars for Sri Lanka is not digestible. Anyone who has done little economics knows you can never pay that money back. Greek can never pay the money back. So what happened after that? The IMF is not a simple bank. Now we don't have any finance minister here today. Otherwise I would have asked them. We had some invitees here. I would have asked them, sir, how do you want to pay the money back? You cannot pay the money back. No way. And we are now in the situation like Greek. If the IMF comes and bails Sri Lanka out, then who's paying the bill? Like in Greece, we will face this, what is written there. Austerity measures. The IMF will say to you, to Sri Lanka and the government, cut the Samurdhi program. Samurdhi, that is poor people getting 5,000 rupees per month. Cut the Janasavya program. Tell the people in Sri Lanka, next time you go to the hospital, you have to pay. Now Sri Lanka is in a such favorable situation, not like many other countries. You go to the hospital, it's free of charge. That is extraordinary exquisite, a positive thing what Sri Lanka has. School system you don't pay. Transport is subsidized. So many positive things. They will put the finger on that. Say, no, no, you can't. You have to first cut the subsidiary programs. In Egypt it happened. Same IMF came to Egypt. They said, you must increase the bread prices. 2 days later, you had a revolution in Egypt. And now you know that you have the NPP here turning up somewhere. They are just waiting for that. If the government imposes no Janasavya, no Samurdi, taxes up, they will get the votes and you have a problem. So I would recommend, I'm also economist, I would say, better have a D rating than that you have riots on the street. We don't need that. Sri Lanka is somehow self-sustainable. Okay, we have the power cuts, we had some other issues here, but I say Sri Lanka is still sustainable. You can live. You don't need all this foreign money, and I would recommend don't go for that. Let us have the D rating. That won't kill us. But if you have the money bailout in your banks, which is only there for a couple of hours, then they have to implement austerity measures, difficult to digest. Now, how Sri Lanka came into trouble, I come also to a solution proposal. There are private creditors who are owning 40% of all that what Sri Lanka has written as what do you say, papers, they have issued papers, so-called sovereign bonds, no? Sri Lanka government made a paper, here, I give you the paper, you give me 5 million, I give you another paper, I give you 10 million, and one day these papers are matured. And Sri Lanka said, sorry, I can't pay. I don't have the money, I don't have the foreign currency. This was not entirely the mistake of Sri Lanka. In 2008, we had a global financial crisis, whole world. Sri Lanka was also affected by that. But Sri Lanka didn't do a mistake. But Sri Lanka did other mistakes, but not that. So, as I said, the debt is in the range of 51 billion, impossible to pay back. And these scholars say, cancel the debts. I think that is a just and a fair argument based on the fact that money is created out of thin air. Forget about the debts. You can ask for that. And these are the professors and the intellectuals who have signed this petition in support of Sri Lanka's debt. A lot of Indian scholars are there, so India is your friend, at least on the highest level. But also we have eminent professors from America, from Europe, and so on. So there's a lot of support for this idea to cancel the debts. Now, the way out of that. If Sri Lanka cannot pay the debts, and I think we will not be able to do that, but there's a way out. We have the main sponsor here. The main sponsor, Thailand Steel Company, and I spoke to the managing director. We had a coffee in the lobby. He told me about his engagements, very commendable, positive engagements to produce steel, to export steel, to turn on the business, and we were talking about cashew plantations and so on and so on. You have young entrepreneurs in big numbers here, talented, intelligent, motivated. But all of these face the same problem. They have a little issues with the bureaucracy, red tape, that goes up to the highest level. So that is one issue where I say decent people should influence the system here, allow these young entrepreneurs to do their business, and in private partnership they can change a lot of things. Export is one important factor which should be supported. The other one is foreign employment. You have an increment of a lot of young people who are going abroad and who will send foreign currency, hopefully through the proper channels. But one thing is where I am directly involved in research on tourism development. You are living in a paradise, but most of you don't understand, you don't realize it. Only foreigners, when they come, they can understand. Sri Lanka is a paradise. It's beautiful, people are friendly. You have fauna, flora, wildlife, you have heritage, you have everything is here. You have 1,200 kilometers, beaches. And you have 12 months a year, fantastic weather. How comes you have only 2 million tourists, 2.3 million tourists in Sri Lanka in good times, before COVID, at the moment less. So if Sri Lanka can get 9 million tourists to the island, you don't want to see the IMF, you don't want to see the World Bank, you don't have credits. You can generate GDP with 9 million tourists that you balance your budget, 9 million. This figure had been calculated by eminent intellectuals. Sri Lanka needs 9 million tourists and you have sufficient income. Can you accommodate 9 million? Critics say cannot, impossible. We have over-tourism. We don't have airports. We have only one airport, another airport in the south, in Matala. China can build a complete airport in 6 weeks. They are capable of making a complete airport in 6 weeks. Now, if you have this number of tourists coming to Sri Lanka, you don't have accommodation. You will have accommodation. Even the young entrepreneurs who are now looking for cashew plantations and for mango plantations for export, they will start immediately building guest houses and hotels. Why not? So the solution is tourism. Because why tourism development is a solution? Because everyone is available. In economics, it goes supply and demand. So if the demand is there, you have already the supply, everything is there, except a little less accommodation. People are friendly, everything is there. I would emphasize, and that is my final sentence here, for good Sri Lanka, I'm happy to be here. I'm here for nearly 40 years now, and I see the positive things more than the negative things. Negative is the IMF. Yeah, and that's the end of my presentation. Thank you for listening to me. And my slogan is, make Lanka great again. I have a channel in YouTube. Thank you.